Sequels have always had a big expectation to live up to. The usual assumption is that the game will be bigger and better than the original in a number of ways, whether it be the game's graphics, combat, evolution of existing gameplay systems, or the introduction of new ones. I think that developers are normally faced with a challenging landscape when it comes to fulfilling a player base's expectations while developing that sequel. Some recent sequels have surpassed the original game in a number of ways and have garnered critical acclaim, such as Alan Wake 2 and Helldivers 2, just to name a couple. Other sequels weren't as well received as their predecessors, such as Hellblade 2 and Dying Light 2. Of course, there are a number of reasons why a game can fail to live up to the lofty expectations that a player base can have, and these can range from a lack of improvement to the existing system or simply just taking the game in the wrong direction. Insomniac Games had a large amount of hype to live up to with the announcement of Spider-Man 2. See, the original Spider-Man and the Miles Morales spin-off were very highly rated, with Spider-Man sitting at an 87 on Metacritic and the Miles Morales standalone at an 85. Personally, I had played both the original Spider-Man and the Miles Morales standalone game, and I enjoyed both quite a bit, but I never touched Spider-Man 2. For whatever reason, I just didn't find myself interested in spending any time in the sequel. Well, it's been quite some time now since the game's release, and I finally decided to bite the bullet and give the game a full playthrough, and along with that, I want to provide an updated review and share my thoughts on the title. Spider-Man 2 picks up about a year after the events of the Miles Morales standalone game. Thankfully, if you haven't played both the original Spider-Man and the Miles Morales one, then there's a nice recap of the events that took place prior to where Spider-Man 2 starts. The story has quite a few moving parts. Similar to the first game, there is a large ensemble of characters that all play a role in the story in some form or fashion. All characters are voiced very well, with Yuri Lowenthal and Najee Jeter returning as Peter Parker and Miles Morales. Spider-Man 2 kicks it up a notch by introducing a whole new dynamic, both being playable and having their stories intertwined. I'll purposely avoid going into spoilers both with the gameplay footage in this review and making sure not to reveal any important details about the story. I will mention that I actually like the story quite a bit. I think going with Kraven as the villain was a bit of a controversial decision, as he doesn't seem to be the most marketable or interesting villain in the Spider-Man universe, but his role in the story and his quest for the ultimate hunt was something I actually ended up enjoying. And there's quite a bit more to it, as the game isn't just simply about playing the hero. Peter Parker and Miles Morales each have their own trials and tribulations that affect themselves and those around them in a number of ways. There's a good layer of depth to these characters that builds from the previous games and gives the player a chance to learn even more about them and their own personal struggles. The story, of course, has a number of huge set pieces that are visually striking and communicate a large sense of scale. New York continues to be the ultimate playground for the chaotic chase sequences and almost natural disaster type damage that takes place during some of the larger and more cinematic boss fights. The story is 100% worth a playthrough, and I would honestly recommend playing the game just for the story itself, as there is more to it than just simply playing the role of a hero. Of course, however, there is more than just the story. Let's get into gameplay. The original game's combat was already good, and going into Spider-Man 2, I was curious at how the combat would evolve to keep things fresh, and the game manages to pull off a few new tricks with some similarities to the first game, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. Combat is very active, with a near constant barrage of enemies being thrown at you, ranging from a good variety of ranged to melee focused enemy types. In Spider-Man 2, of course, you have the option to play as either Miles Morales or Peter Parker, each of which have their own distinct play styles. Now, they play pretty similarly in terms of the basic moveset that they have, but where they begin to diverge is with the active abilities they each have access to. Miles uses a number of different electric-based attacks, while Peter sticks with his web-based moveset. These abilities are activated with the L1 and a face button, and they can also be augmented in different ways as you progress down the skill tree, but more on the whole upgrade system later. During my time with the game, I found myself being more fond of Miles Morales' moveset. I like the variation of abilities, like using the chain lightning to start out a fight, followed by his Venom jump and Venom smash attacks. Eventually, Peter gets access to Venom abilities as well, which definitely adds some much needed flavor to his playstyle, and I found the Venom abilities that Peter eventually gets to be more fun to use than what he had originally available, and these definitely helped in mixing up the gameplay quite a bit. The flow of combat remains largely the same, with some new additions to help spice it up, and Enemies will come at you in large groups, and your reactions are paramount to your survival. Above Spider-Man's head is his Spidey sense. This indicator essentially tells you when to dodge or parry. If it's white, you can dodge early to avoid any oncoming damage. If it turns red, then you'll be able to pull off a perfect dodge, or if you're up against a melee enemy, it would be the best time to pull off the newly added parry and hit them with a counter attack. The combat continues to be something I feel like the game really excels at. At any time during an encounter, you can use your web shooters to tie up enemies, you can rip guns away from ranged ones, you can swing across the arena, kick an enemy up in the air, use one of your gadgets to pull all the enemies in, or even use a concussive blast to shake everything up, and much more. The removal of the somewhat cumbersome gadget wheel from the first game really helps in creating a seamless and fluid combat experience. The game also has the focus system returning, which charges up based on how many attacks you've successfully pulled off. This ends up allowing you to either use a finisher move or heal up mid-combat. During my playtime, those focus bars were very often used to heal. What I really ended up liking is the amount of creativity and the number of different options you have when approaching combat that help keep it both fresh and engaging. Given the number of tools at your disposal, from web gadgets to Spider-Man's own abilities, as well as unlocking new moves to pull off for both Miles and Peter as you level up, aid in keeping the feeling of combat constantly evolving. Now, it's worth mentioning that combat can definitely get a bit frantic, especially when you're dealing with hunter outposts. Your Spidey sense will constantly be warning you that it's time to dodge after barely getting any hits in time and time again. My advice is that if you do end up buying the game, make sure to take down the ranged enemies first. I'll very quickly just cover enemy variety, which there is a good amount of. You have a number of different factions of enemies, from regular street thugs, members of the Flame, and Kraven's Hunters, just to name a few, and each of these factions will have some different enemy types. For example, you'll have brute types that require a special approach to take down, you'll encounter ranged enemies that you'll have to close the distance on, and other enemy types that might emit some type of AoE attack that disables your ability. These are just a few examples, and I won't dig too deep just to avoid spoilers. Boss fights are something I enjoyed quite a bit. They're all very cinematic, and the scale of these fights are massive, as some have you tearing down whole blocks and buildings. Some fights are definitely harder than others, which in my opinion is a good thing, as I hardly remember dying in the original Spider-Man, but found myself dying a fair amount in Spider-Man 2. This leads me to talk about difficulty levels. The game does feature 5 different levels of varying difficulty that range from what's basically a story mode to an extremely challenging one. I personally played on Spectacular, which is one level below the hardest, and I found that to be ample enough challenge for me and my abilities. Now, it's worth mentioning that there is a whole stealth system in the game, and that gives you the option to take out these large groups of enemies quietly by creating distractions using your web shooters and creating web lines to get close. But to be completely honest, I almost never engaged in stealth unless the game forced me to in some scenarios. If I'm playing Spider-Man, then my intention was to play Spider-Man to the fullest, so unfortunately I don't have too much to say about the stealth portion other than the fact that it exists. Overall though, the combat was something I ended up liking quite a bit, and I felt that it evolved on the original game's formula quite well. Let's dive into the upgrade system. We'll start out with the suit tech upgrades, which are basically flat increases in different categories that are pretty important to keep up with if you intend to have a good time in combat. Health, damage, focus, and traversal can all be incrementally upgraded with tech parts and tokens. I'll walk down one of these skill trees to give you a better idea of what you can expect. The damage tree starts out with a couple of flat damage increases, and then you get the option to choose between 2 passive abilities. For example, these determine whether you deal increased damage to enemies in midair, or if your parries recharge your abilities quicker. You don't have to pick one or the other and be stuck with it, you can always choose one of these on the fly. It's then followed by another couple of damage increases and 2 additional passive choices, and finished up with 2 more flat damage increases. The suit tech upgrades are fine, but it makes me wonder if there was really any real reason to include this particular skill tree outside of those few passive choice abilities. I personally think the game would have been better off just providing these flat damage, health, and focus increases as you level up, rather than making it something you have to go around and find upgrade parts for, but that's just my 2 cents. In addition to the suit tech upgrades, you also have the gadgets, and these can be augmented using the same tokens and tech parts that were used for the suit tech. Let's just quickly walk down the web grabber gadget The first upgrade down this path makes it so that you can pull throwables away from enemies. The second upgrade allows you to grab enemies from further away. The third upgrade makes it so that brutes can be pulled in. The fourth upgrade increases the number of enemies that are pulled in. And finally, the last upgrade makes it so that your web grabber becomes electrified. The gadgets were a really crucial part of gameplay, but I never really upgraded these in my playthrough. My tech parts largely went into my suit upgrades instead. Regardless, their effectiveness in combat was something I often relied on, especially when my main abilities were on cooldown. Last but certainly not least is the Spider-Man skill tree. Going into the game, I was genuinely curious how the upgrade system would work given the fact that you play multiple characters, and I'm happy to report that I was pleasantly surprised both with the number of options available and how the upgrade system works in general. So to break it down, you have 3 different skill trees, one for Miles, one for Peter, and one for both of them. I'm sure it's quite obvious, but adding a skill point in the skill tree that exists for both Miles and Peter grants both of them access to that newly acquired skill or passive ability. This particular skill tree typically grants an additional move to pull off during combat, like the web yank for example, which allows you to move enemies side to side and into objects, and there is a good amount of choice here. Thankfully, these upgrades are impactful and affect the gameplay quite substantially. My personal journey down this skill tree was just to start out by picking up the passive abilities to help me recharge my active ones a bit faster. Outside of the combined skill tree, each of the 2 Spider-Man have their own special trees that is tied to their existing abilities. These particular upgrade paths either unlock a completely new ability like Miles' Venom Jump or augment the ability in some way, like this particular example which recharges your Venom Jump faster if you've only attacked one enemy with it. Because leveling up happens so often as it does in this game, you'll constantly be having a new skill point to spend. I found that the overall upgrades for both Miles and Peter were impactful. I like the different ways a skill can be improved, and the amount of choices to make are not overwhelming. The videos that played to give you a better idea of what the skill will perform like during gameplay was also a very welcome addition. Overall though, the upgrade system that exists in Spider-Man 2 is quite good. It grants you a number of choices to make and allows you to craft a playstyle that you feel comfortable with. And outside of my one complaint about the suit tech upgrades, I generally liked what I saw. Let's talk about the open world. Insomniac at this point has had more than a few open world game notches under their belt, and it shows given the quality of the beautifully crafted open world as well as the quantity of activities available in Spider-Man 2. The city of New York looks amazing, and the rendition of the city to the game is very well done. There is much to do as you swing around the city, and these activities are never far from one another, making it so that when you're going from mission to mission, you'll likely stumble across multiple side activities that are worth doing. These activities range from small puzzles that need to be solved, collectibles to be picked up, prowler catches to be looted, Sandman memories to unlock, and much more. Aside from those, you'll often come across crime reports, and these are dynamic small little events that come up from time to time within the city that require your attention. Sometimes it's a bank robbery, sometimes a chase down, and sometimes it's just simply a brawl. And for completing these, you get rewarded with some XP. In general, side activities are an integral part of the game, as many upgrades rely on the currency gained from completing these side missions such as hero tokens and tech parts. Each of these various districts have their own set of missions to complete, and thankfully the map contains a checklist for each of these different areas to let you know what you've completed and what you still have left to do. This is also a very welcome addition to any game and a quality of life feature that I hope continues to stick around, especially in these large open world games. Completing these side activities within a district rewards you with different unlockables. These come in the form of skill points, and strangely, you can also unlock fast travel to that district you've completed enough side activities in. Now, I don't know about you, but I did not and would not use a fast travel system in a Spider-Man game. Traversal in Spider-Man 2 is of course done mostly by swinging across the city, but this time Spider-Man has a new way to get around, specifically with the newly introduced web wings. This new form of travel allows you to simply glide across a city, and my goodness did I enjoy doing this. Swinging of course is great, but being able to get across a city after building up enough speed just by gliding to the next location was something I did very often. The game even has these wind tunnels that exist between tall buildings to help you gain a large amount of speed with your web wings, making traversal even faster. Overall, the open world that Insomniac has crafted is very well done. The sheer number of side activities to do, as well as the actual look of the city and the feeling of swinging around the city, are all extremely high points to me. Graphically, the game looks great. I don't have too much to say here other than most of the character models look good. The facial expressions are well done. A couple of characters have undergone some changes, like Mary Jane having her model changed up a good amount. Performance-wise, the game is extremely crisp, which is to be expected from Insomniac at this point since they're constantly at the forefront of PlayStation's latest tech. I personally played in performance mode, which runs at 1440p and gets you 60 FPS with ray tracing enabled. Quality mode gets you 4K with up to 40 FPS if you have a TV with the 120Hz mode. I really didn't run into any performance issues during my time at all. There weren't any frame drops that were evident to me either. I did encounter a couple of bugs, mostly during some of the chaotic combat sequences, and one of these led me to being stuck in a pipe somehow, but I eventually made it out. Overall though, the game looks really good and its performance is even better. It's time to wrap this review up. Overall, Spider-Man 2 is a worthy sequel despite me avoiding it for over a year and thinking it would have not been worth my time. I'm very happy to be wrong about that. It's a game that manages to evolve the existing formula. The combat has seen some changes with the addition of a parry and the removal of the gadget wheel. It's more streamlined and fluid. Traversal has also improved greatly, with the web wings being a very welcome addition to the game. The open world is large with a great variety of activities to do, most of which are quick and reward you with upgrade material. The story is one that I personally found enjoyable. While Craven isn't the most marketable villain, I ended up liking the overall plot involving Miles and Peter and their own development as friends and partners. All in all, I really would recommend the game to just about anyone. Even if you're not particularly a fan of Spider-Man or Marvel to begin with, I think there's something here that you'll definitely enjoy. And of course, if you are a Spider-Man fan, then this game is a complete no-brainer. So that wraps up my review of Spider-Man 2. Thank you all for watching. As always, if you guys enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe, and I will see you all in the next one.